Hello, welcome to AI in Action, exploring tomorrow's tech today. My name is Maurie, and I'm here with my husband Jim. And we are here yet again to talk about artificial intelligence and just things that Jim tends to read in the news. Because if you've been listening to our podcast for the last 16 episodes, you know that Jim is quite obsessed with AI, which kind of rubs off on me a little bit. I have no choice in the matter. So, sorry that we were not here last Sunday.
It's been a little spotty this month.
It's been a little spotty this month because our oldest son got married. So we were actually at a wedding last Sunday, which is when we typically record on Sunday evenings so that we can drop the podcast first thing Monday morning.
And before that, I was in the hospital.
And before that, you're in the hospital.
So it's been a month.
It's been quite the adventure. So anyway, we are here to talk today about some of the latest news about AI in our government, things that are going on, not just in the United States, but worldwide about regulations and AI policies. We are going to start with the first article about, which one do you want to start with? How about President Biden?
Yeah, that was the big news for the week. There's been discussions about him issuing an executive order about artificial intelligence. Well, that finally dropped, and I didn't read every single bit of it, but I kind of got the gist of it. But the gist of it is that they want to start trying to talk about here
risk.
in the United States.
It's always about the risk.
Well, it's about the risk, but they don't talk about the risk. They talk about talking about the risk.
Right.
It's like, okay, we need to have a panel. We need to have so this was basically supposedly an impetus for, setting standards, putting money into making sure that AI is not going to do anything dangerous.
Risk of using AI to engineer dangerous biological materials, protect against that.
There's so many different aspects of it. And some of it that people get really excited about is more in their imagination than reality. I mean, as someone who uses AI tools every day and I stay up with it all the time, I read about it, as you just pointed out. I'm a little obsessed with it. A lot of these safety measure, a lot of this fear is to do with, it feels like they've been watching a lot of sci-fi movies. And so they always take it to the worst case scenario.
Well, that's what gets the most clicks. We've talked about that before.
It also is how you get funding for stuff too. But this seemed like a good start. The United States, we've talked about it in previous podcasts. The problem with the United States is we tend to follow litigation. We don't tend to have rules and regulations and safety and all that stuff based on what we really should be thinking about. We tend to go, okay, what are they suing each other over?
Right.
And we'll put policies in place about that.
Right. We let the courts decide.
Yeah. And that's reactive, not proactive. So this kind of felt proactive. And as I understand it, there's also some discussions about putting some grants and money, because it's not just about creating standards, but it's about how do we keep the United States from getting behind everybody else, which is one of the fear factor things that the big companies use. If we do put guardrails up, then we're going to prevent the United States from developing it. Therefore, we're going to get behind China or Russia or whoever.
Right. Well, when you're looking at the article, which was just released today, there's standards about safety and security.
Mm-hmm.
Then it also has a little section about, privacy, protecting Americans' privacy.
Yeah, that's kind of a big one.
How do you protect privacy when people are willing to click on anything?
Yeah, I mean, it seems like people don't even care about their privacy. They share their entire life online.
Everything's out there, but they're trying to protect that. They also talk about, equity and civil rights. One of the big things is about like algorithm discrimination.
I hear the word bias a lot.
Right. And then the consumer and students and patients, making sure that you have all the responsible that, and just using AI responsibly when it comes to, like here it talks about in healthcare, the responsible use of AI in healthcare. And to me, it's things like let it develop those life-saving drugs and make things affordable, allow it to do that, but also have those safety programs in place to make sure it's not doing unsafe things.
Well, I mean, that's why it's supposed to be a tool. It's sort of like a co-pilot. They call them co-pilots all the time. It's a co-programmer. It's supposed to be a tool the doctors use, the nurses use, the researchers use. So Yeah, and I agree. I think that's a good idea.
The other thing is about workers. Of course, there's going to be some things in there about AI not taking away like art and artistic people's rights. And I mean,
Well, I think that's a
uh,
lot of it. Also, is there's a lot of even when you look at the Hollywood strike. I mean, the
right,
Hollywood strike was about AI taking away people's jobs, and you can certainly argue that AI could take away people's jobs and that jobs have to be protected. But that's a fine line because how do you protect jobs without making redundant jobs? Or so, if an AI can easily take the job, then should it?
right.
So there's discussions about that as well.
They're
Th-
promoting innovation and
that's what I was talking about
competition,
earlier,
about putting money into it
to
to
make
promote
sure
it.
we don't
The
lose
other
our competitive
thing
advantage.
is advancing American leadership abroad, which that's going to segue into the next article that just came out.
Yes.
Um, it's a long article. The last thing was about ensuring responsible and effective government use of AI. So making sure our government's not using it for things they shouldn't be using it for. But
Yeah.
the ensuring the responsible, advancing the American leadership abroad. The gentleman
Okay, you're going to go ahead and try to say that. Risha Sunak?
Rishi
He's the British Prime Minister. Let's just leave
Sunak,
it at that.
okay, he
And
came out with a new global AI safety
well,
article.
the word safety is being very much abused because how do you define safety? Is safety that you don't give it the launch codes, or is safety have to do with whether or not it makes a bad diagnosis, or does safety have to do with whether or not it's helping people push out, the wrong information, all
Right.
this
Oh,
info
on social media posts
on
or
the
things
social
like
media
that.
posts. So there's a lot of the term safety is very, very general. So naturally,
London, they're going to establish an artificial intelligence safety institute.
right here in the UK. So again, they're trying to grab that leadership role,
Yes.
and they've done a pretty impressive job in England and France. It seems like it for a while there. Everything I saw that had to do with AI was coming out of France.
Yes.
So every country wants to be the leader. They're trying to grab that role. I say that with quotes, like anybody can see me making quotation marks in the air,
Hmm.
but everybody wants that leadership role, to say that their country is ahead of everybody else. But at the same time, we're making sure that AI is safety and yada, yada, yada. So,
Right. So he's saying that the new institute is going to build on the work of Britain's existing Frontier AI Task Force, which has already been there for a while. Okay.
mhm.
And now they are saying that basically they know that they have to get other world powers involved. And so, one of the things that really impressed me is that he was saying that they were going to have to establish a truly global expert panel from other countries. And they're having a summit, which is supposed to be next week, I believe.
I think so.
I think it's
Yes, I
next
think it is
week.
next week.
Um, but he's saying that strategy cannot happen unless other countries are involved. Which is true. I mean, you can come up with all of these rules, and then if another world power says, well, we're not going to follow that rule, then it doesn't do you any good. We were just saying it's kind of like, you know, climate change policy. If you say that you're going to have a certain amount of emissions and you're going to cap it at this, and then the person in the yard next to you doesn't follow those rules, it doesn't do you any good,
Yeah,
or
and
not much good.
it doesn't do as much good. Of course, there's also the jokes about things designed by committee. Yeah, from my perspective as a long-term technology person, the place that I've seen things happen that were the most effective, even though they were horribly painful, I was even on one of the standards committees a long time ago. And the standards committees, it seems a little weird, but sometimes the best stuff comes from them. And I haven't really seen any. I see a lot of people using words like preventing bias and preventing,
Misinformation.
safety and misinformation, all the other stuff. What I haven't seen a lot is, okay, how do we create a set of standards? And I've seen, discussions about licensing the large language models. Before you can release a large language model, you have to get a license. I don't think licensing is the right approach. I think standards are the right approach, because when you create standards, it becomes easier for everybody else to build off of your standards. So everyone migrates that way because the money follows it, because everybody wants to build something that can be utilized across,
Wide surfaces. Yeah.
lots and lots of
Lots of
different people and
platforms.
platforms.
Hmm.
Standards seem to do that. Now, how do you create a standard for an artificial intelligence? Well, that's a good question, because in many ways we don't really understand how an artificial intelligence actually works and what are those standards need to be. But that's, I think, where they need to be having a lot of discussions. But right now it's a lot more about politicians talking about it, because they're all trying to one up everybody else and show that, yes, we're doing it safely, but we're making sure that our country is the leader. And I think that's, you see, that's the kind of the
Right.
thing for everybody.
Everyone wants to be the best.
I did put a weird article in here, so I guess we can go to that one next if you like. This article, which, what does it have to do with standards? Well, this is where I don't always like to just read everybody's articles. I like to kind of make my own prognostications about what might be happening. And there's a new interesting thing that I saw MIT Technology Review about data poisoning. Tool lets artists fight back against generative AI. Why does this have to do? What does this have to do with standards? Well, these kinds of activities, which everybody goes, I can see that. I can see why. Basically, lets artists put a hidden, as I understand it, they can put something in their images that when an AI tries to ingest that image, it actually poisons the data. Meaning,
like a virus?
Well, it's
like
not. It's not a
like
virus.
A mini virus?
It's not. It's not really a virus, because a virus kind of grows.
Yeah.
This is just simply, it gives
Your
it bad
picture
data.
doesn't look pretty.
It gives it bad. It distorts the data, and so therefore the image doesn't get ingested looking very well. So you basically, I don't think of it as, I'm going to give you a really ugly image and you're going to ingest that, which means you're not going to be able to create pretty images from it.
Okay.
Sounds good, right? This is the kind of stuff where people, it's those law of unintended side effects, unintended consequences. I think this is where you end up with.
I have to read this.
Okay, well, let me finish my thought, and then you can read that. This is where you end up with governments and people stepping in, going, "Hey, we have to create standards that say this is against the rules. You can't do." I see why they're doing it, but I still don't think that this is going to turn out like they think. I think what's going to happen is this is going to get folded into regulations, because there's always been people that were trying to do something that's, like a jammer. Remember those jammers that they used to try to sell, that you could jam cell phone signals so they could put them in movie theaters so people couldn't use their cell phone. And then suddenly they realized that those jammers kind of bled over and jammed cell phone signals next
Security
door.
issues.
And pretty soon it became an issue with, we're not going to let you have a jammer, even though your intentions were good.
Right.
Because by having one, you're going to keep somebody else from making a cell phone call
that they might have to make.
Well, none of that. They might not be in your building.
Right.
So this could end up.
The person next door might need to call 911.
How do you know this? What this does isn't going to poison the entire language model.
So what they're saying here, it's a tool called Nightshade.
Yes.
And it's intended as a way to fight back against AI companies that use artist work to train their models without the creator's permission. Using it to poison this training data could damage future iterations of image generating AI models such as DALL-E, Midjourney, and Stable Diffusion.
They're going to get in trouble.
By rendering some of their outputs useless. Dogs become cats, cars become cows, and so forth. So they're literally making the pixels turn into something else.
Well, yeah, because what it does is it like leads it astray, for lack of a better term. That when it gets trained on that model, it makes the model not able to then use the data it's learned.
But then they're saying it's going to propagate.
Well, the problem is how do you make sure that it doesn't propagate to other language models by accident or some subset of a language? This really sounds dangerous.
Yeah,
it sounds cool. But this is where regulations, this is where standards, this is where those things start kicking in, and they start going, no, you cannot do this. You cannot poison somebody's data, even though your intentions were good, because what is that saying? The road to hell is paved with good intentions. So the next one I thought was interesting, because it's like there's a foot race right now by all these different big companies to say they're doing something for safety. It's everywhere.
That's the buzzword.
We're going to be safe. We're going to put up guardrails. We're going to make sure that we're going to protect you. And they're all like stepping all over each other to be the safest one, right? I just saw that Anthropic, which does Claude was built on this idea of constitutional AI, meaning that it has a set of rules that it's supposedly trained by, which is supposed to make it safer. Well, you know, Amazon has invested $4 billion in. Google put in 2 billion. They just put in another 2 billion. So they're putting all this money into Anthropic and Claude because they all want to have this safe model. They're all wanting to show that they're doing this. Of course, in Amazon's case, they don't really care because they just want everybody to run it on AWS. You know,
Mhm.
we've got GPUs for you. Run your large language model here, but there's no real reason that Google would put more money into Anthropic when Google has their own models, other than trying to say, "Hey, we're trying to be safe." So then, which goes to this announcement, which is
Fact checked.
fact check images. So what is everybody's big concern? First,
Art.
well, the first thing they tried to do was say they were going to watermark the images. But about 2 days after they said, here's how we're going to start watermarking, somebody came out with research that says, well, guess what? That's really not going to work. So now, how do you do a
Why
fact
is
check?
that really not going to work?
Because you can remove water. The problem when you watermark something is it's hard to keep another AI from removing the watermark.
Oh, yeah.
And so
Yeah, since they have all of the editing tools now down to a pixel level, they could just take the pixel next to it and just basically
they
go over
trained
the
an AI to
watermark.
remove watermarks. I
Right.
mean, and so they said it's really not going to work. But now Google's talking about fact checking an image. That's an interesting idea. The question is,
How?
not really a lot of people could have enough data to fact check. I mean, who has enough images to fact check an image? I
Right.
mean, you're going to have to compare it to something to fact check it, right? Well, what are they saying they're going to compare it to?
Hmm.
Users can understand when the image was first seen by Google to see how recent it was. Well, okay, that seems reasonable because you can tell if it's generated, right?
Right.
I, they're also, I mean, again,
Metadata.
let's talk about the standards again. What if there was a standard that says I'm not going to use this image unless the metadata is signed? So you could argue that, well, yeah, an AI could alter the image, but if we sign things all the time with digital signatures, maybe there's a way to sign that metadata, and then people say, by a standard, we're not going to allow that image to be shown on our site unless it has a signed metadata. I think there ought to be some potential. Of course, this is me again going off in the weeds, and what do I know about it? But I think there ought to be something where blockchain ought to be able to fit into this. So somebody attests to the legitimacy of that image being generated, and it gets added to the
Well,
blockchain.
yeah, it's like a priceless piece of art that you have to trace its history. I mean, it's
Yes,
kind of like
or a cow. You know, we're
mhm.
from Texas.
Yeah,
Well, I mean,
exactly.
they
Whenever
have
a
the entire
cow's born,
history of the cow all the
absolutely.
way to. It seems like that maybe that's what Google's talking about doing here. I could misunderstand it, but I think that you could simply say, "This is the image. Here's the signature from this image that says it's authentic or whatever it is, and here's the metadata that says it's checked out." And again, maybe there's a play, maybe somebody's doing this where they're using blockchain as a way to attest to its entire history, because that's one of the things blockchain is good for. They're using it for cows
Right.
because you can't alter a single block in there. You have to, it's blockchain requires everybody that's there kind of attests to the data that's there. You have all
Hmm.
these different servers that all kind of they check each other to make
Hmm.
sure that the data is accurate, as I understand it. Maybe that's the answer, but that sounds like a standards problem again. You just say, I'm not, all the sites say I'm not going to display this information unless it's been fact checked. I got a history on it. So I
Good idea.
know, and that way you can force them to say whether or not it was created by a person or by an AI. Okay,
Speaking of, we've been talking about safety.
there it is again.
There it is
We
again.
love that word. And what's
So
this one?
this regulation talk is about safety.
And who's, just go ahead and read the headline. Who's the list?
Anthropic,
Anthropic, which is
Anthropic,
Claude.
Google, Microsoft, and OpenAI have all announced executive director of the Frontier Model Forum and over 10 million for a new safety AI safety fund.
So what do they have in Europe that they're talking about? An
Well,
AI Safety Institute.
mm-hmm.
Now we have an AI safe through this Frontier thing. We have an AI Safety Fund. I really think it's difficult. I think it's difficult for any. You notice, by the way, there's one big one missing out of this, which is Meta.
Meta.
Meta's not in here, and they're the ones putting out these open source models, which I would think it'd be kind of important to make sure that they're in this group as well. It's like they were talking about in Europe. If everyone doesn't participate, then really does it do any good? Well, Meta is one of the big generators. Maybe Meta should be in here as well, and they're open. Large language models, from what I've been reading, are really not that open. So, what are they going to do with this fund? Can you get a feel for this?
I'm looking at it. First of all, the person that they've hired is the first executive director. He is coming from. He was a director of artificial intelligence and emerging technology initiative at the Brookings Institute. He says that the most powerful AI models hold enormous promise for society, but to realize their potential, we need to better understand how to safely develop and evaluate them. I'm
I agree with
excited
that
to take
statement.
on that challenge with the Frontier Model Forum.
I think the first thing they have to do is define. Again, you and I talked about this early
Mainly, this is
on.
just talking about him. This article is talking about how it has. I mean, it's only on the 25th of October that they announced that
Yes,
they
they were
have
adding this
selected
10 million
him.
bucks, and they added him
So,
to it.
5 days later, I don't think they really know what they're going to
Well,
do.
that's because first of all, they don't fully know how the models work. Second of all, define safety. Remember, you and I early on we talked about this. The only people that seem to be defining safety in a generalist term was in Europe.
Yeah.
And what were they defining as safety? We're basically going to say, since we don't understand it,
If it can kill you, it's not going to have
we're
AI
not
in
going to put
it.
AI in there. We're not going to have it flying airplanes,
High
driving
risk.
ambulances.
Not going to put in high risk
We're
stuff.
not going to put it in high risk stuff. So I think if they haven't done it already, they really need to define safety in its different forms.
Right.
Does safety mean understanding how it works? Because if that's the case, if we have to understand, it
We
may
won't
delay it
know.
years because
Well,
I'm not sure. I did read a model the other day where they were talking about how I think it was Anthropic, came up with a really good model for understanding how neural nets work.
yes.
How the information flows through them. But even with that, do you define safety as under? Because how many things do we have out in the world where we don't really understand them that well, but we use them anyway? We
Right.
think we
Constantly.
understand them, but
Constantly.
we kind of throw them out there and
See what
trial by
happens.
fire, see what happens.
Yeah.
And when they first started driving cars, they weren't very safe. The
Yeah.
people got killed. They ran over things.
Have you listened to a commercial for any drug in the world?
It's got the
I
long
mean,
list of possible side
it
effects.
might have gone through all the trials, but believe me,
The possible
just
side
because it's
effects are
approved doesn't mean there's not a
enormous.
lot of side effects. I heard something the other day. Somebody else came up about, well, the car that was driven, self-driving cars and artificial intelligence of self-driving cars, and there was this accident that happened, and it ran into a pedestrian. I don't know exactly what it was, but our son actually pointed out whenever I made a comment about it, because we know somebody in Houston that she says she puts it on automatic on the interstates in Houston. There are more accidents caused by human error on the roads than, you know, all of the self-driven cars put together.
Yeah, well, you
Now
could argue that there's
statistically
a
it
whole
might
lot
keep
less self-driving cars than there
right,
are people.
right.
Therefore, there's going to be a
You have
lot.
to look at it on a one-to-one basis, but still.
Well, I think, first of all, you and I have talked about this too. I think that they're starting the self-driving cars. I know that they're anxious to put them in cities because that's where all the money is.
Small towns.
But
They need them in
they had done that in
small
Florida. They had
towns.
done that in Florida. Some small town in Florida said, "Hey, bring them here to
Mhm.
test," and they basically were, saying the city would sign a waiver saying
Right.
that they weren't responsible. And I
I'm
think
looking at this article still about the $10 million that was given, and
the
it say
safety fund.
the safety fund. What's next? So it talks about over the coming months, they're going to establish a. You ready for this? An advisory board.
There we go.
There you go. Another board is being established. Everything's going to be okay now. They're going to help guide the strategy and priorities and represent a range of perspectives and expertise.
But
And then they're going to issue a first call for proposals, and additional technical findings are going to
designed
be
by committee.
issued.
Designed by committee.
And yeah, so
Yeah, I think that I'm not. I mean, I'm not trying to be overly cynical about it. I do think these things are important. I'm sure, maybe I'll do a little research on that. I'm have to wonder if the national standards committees aren't actually looking into how do we create standards on, and that's somewhat what they're talking about. They just keep using the word safety over and over again. But in reality, you take like when we build Agnes for the school, and you take and break Agnes down into its component parts, and the large language model is one of the parts. you kind of break this process down into parts and you say, let's define safety for, or let's define a set of standards for testing the viability of each one of these parts and
Right.
then the system as a whole. And people have been doing that for a long time. A lot of different software packages. I mean, airplanes do crash, but they're incredibly safe by comparison. And part of the reason is they've got a very
Standards.
standard set of testing and rules that they apply. The same thing with those drugs. I mean, they may
Hmm.
not be perfect, but there's a good set of standards and rules. And maybe that's what they're trying to do here. Maybe they're trying to create that. They're kind of abusing it a little bit. I think that's the press, maybe more than anything.
Okay, so I'm going to be, I probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it
Well,
anyway.
maybe you shouldn't say that.
Maybe it's because the people that are involved the most with artificial intelligence are not necessarily engineers.
Well, these are all politicians and these are executives at the top of companies. Now, some of these executives have real honest to God experience as an engineer or as a software developer or as
That's what I mean. I
whatever.
mean, if
But
you're developing software, you don't necessarily, like if I look at something like a scripting language, are there standards
sure,
involved in scripting languages?
it's their deployment there's a standard in how you develop them. What the problem is, they have for years, they've really haven't had, in some places, they don't have good standards for deployment.
Okay.
But they do, depending on the industries, have it. And you cannot talk about AI in general as a set of safety rules
You have to
because
take it each
you have to
component
take it because safety is different in medicine than it is just like
in education.
it's like it is in education. You and I focus a lot on helping teachers, not dealing with the student side of the AI, because we have the teacher, it's a partner with the teacher.
Right.
And I really think that all of that focus should be on not just safety, but having a partner. You can't let this thing run solo. It's going to have to run with somebody. Just like the self-driving cars are not
Need to
supposed to.
have to be
You're
sitting
supposed
behind.
to be
Somebody
sitting
has to be
behind
sitting
the
behind the
wheel
wheel.
whenever they
Hmm.
do it. So just make sure there's somebody behind the wheel. We've solved all the problems of the world, but we're also running out of time.
Yes. And the solution to the problem is standards.
Well, I think that they need to create. I'd like to see that word more. Maybe they are doing that, but I'd like to see that word more than safety, safety, safety. I'm getting tired of that word.
Okay.
There needs to be a new word. We got to pick another word now.
Sounds good.
Standards instead of safety.
All right. So I am
How
Maury.
about safety standards?
Oh, it's been overused.
Yeah, it has been
Yeah,
overused.
it's been overused. I'm Mari, and I'm with my husband Jim, and we really appreciate you guys listening in to our little bitty podcast called AI in Action, where we are exploring tomorrow's tech today. Thank y'all, and have a great rest of the week.